Welcome to Knowledgeable Aging. I'm your host, Jason Kotar. Joining us today to talk about Caregiver Identified is Malika Moore. Malika founded Aging and Amazing LLC to provide support to aging and amazing adults, caregivers, and professionals through an innovative and engaging education and consulting. Aging and Amazing has evolved into a 24/7 online community designed especially for those aging caregivers and any professionals specializing in aging. It's scheduled to launch in May of 2022. With more than 10 years of experience as a professional, clinician, and business owner, Malika champions for older adults and caregivers.
Thank
Wow.
you.
How are you doing, Malika? Almost lost it there.
Jason, thank you for having me today. I'm so excited to be here finally.
Yes, yeah, we've been talking for a while, so I'm excited we were able to finally collaborate. But before we get started, Malika, for those that are joining us for the live webinar, if you have any questions, type your questions in. There's a control panel on your right-hand side. Type your questions in. Time permitting, we will do everything in our power to get your questions answered. So Malika, I'm going to turn it over to you. Caregiver Identified.
Thank you, Jason. Caregiver Identified. Before we start this presentation, I do want to acknowledge this presentation is a little bit different because as caregivers, what I've noticed in working with older adults and caregivers just in the aging arena, that often caregivers lose their identity and all they are, they become a caregiver only. They don't remember anything else because it kind of overwhelms their life. That is another presentation for another day. Today we're going to explore right now that you're a caregiver and where can you kind of find this space where you're comfortable with what you're doing as a caregiver and kind of put it in a pocket, so to speak, if you can ever put caregiving in a pocket. So let's just move forward. Okay, what to expect? We are going to talk about Caregiving Defined, Caregiving Types, Caregiving Styles, and Caregiver Identified. So hopefully you are engaging in the chat. I do want to hear your feedback because I always love to hear different perspectives on this particular topic. Jason he's already given this wonderful introduction about aging and amazing. I will say that I'm very proud of how this company has grown and evolved since 2019. We've been able to start off really doing work heavily in long-term care. And so that's nursing homes, assisted livings, and we've done tons of webinars and talks. And now we've transitioned to this 24/7 online community, and we're very, very excited. Aging and Amazing started as an office dream for me. I was actually working in a nursing home telling my colleague about this company that I wanted to start. She came to me later in the week. She handed me $200 and said, I see how you love older adults, caregivers, and how you're invested in professionals. She said, go and start your business. So she gave me enough money to get the LLC. And here we are in 2022 and just doing great things. And it's all because of you. All right, caregiving definitions. Now, only you can really define who you are and what you do as a caregiver. This slide doesn't even compare, doesn't even acknowledge everything that you do. I'll give you a few definitions. A caregiver, from Webster's definition, a person who has responsibility for the care of another. Then we have Collins Dictionary, who says a person who has accepted responsibility for looking after a vulnerable neighbor or relative. Then we have a definition from Lumina Hospice, emotional, someone who's overseeing emotional, financial, nursing, social, and homemaking needs on a daily or intermittent basis. One definition that really stuck out to me, I'll be interested to hear your definitions of what a caregiver is Collins Dictionary's definition. A person who has accepted responsibility for looking after a vulnerable neighbor or relative. What I find that this definition is missing, and I don't know if anyone is thinking along the same lines as me, is that sometimes this role is not accepted. And that does not mean that you don't have love for your relative or the neighbor or whoever you're caregiving for. But sometimes this role is kind of forced upon people. And I've noticed this just being in facilitating support groups. People feel a lot of guilt if they have to say, hey, I really didn't want to accept this role, but no one else would do it, or my siblings wouldn't step up, or I saw that this person had no one in the building and I stepped up. So it can be a role that people just joyously step up and it just seems like a wonderful calling. And it can be a role that, you know, maybe you didn't have a good relationship with this person, but you're all they have and you've stepped up in this role. So I just want to highlight that it's not always accepted, but there is a great layer of responsibility. I'm eager to hear what each of you have to say about your definition of caregiving. All right, so we have different types of caregivers. We have formal caregivers. Those are your professionals. And sometimes it gets a little intertwined. I know, especially when I'm doing presentations or meeting with people, I have to think of my audience, because some caregivers are actually your home health aides, your geriatric care managers. Those are people who are paid to pretty much manage your care with your loved one. You may have nurses or social workers like me. So you have different type of former caregivers who they do this for a living. They have skills, education, it's fee for service. Those are your formal caregivers. Then we have informal caregivers, family, friends, neighbors, those that fit in those categories. Sandwich generation. I wanted to add sandwich generation because those are the caregivers providing for care for two generations. Specifically, you have often someone raising their children and caring for often a parent, or it may not be a parent, it may be an older family member that needs support, and they're providing that. So imagine being caught between these two generations and you're providing very critical need for a critical time in the children's life and a critical time in the older adult's life. So it really is something to be mentioned. One that's not listed on here, and I think it needs to get just more attention in general, because I feel for these caregivers, they often don't consider themselves as caregivers. Long distance caregivers. I think they need a whole category themselves. I know I was speaking with a caregiver recently, and my first question to her was, how long have you been caregiving? And she only said a year. The reason she only said a year is because her parent just moved in with her. However, she had been providing care, be it financial, emotional, sometimes physical support when she's in the area, for over 10 years. So I said, we need to redefine this. It's not that you've just become a caregiver in a year, you've been a long distance caregiver. And I noticed that sometimes long distance caregivers discount what they do because they feel like they're not doing enough because they're not in the geographical area. And so we want to demystify that. That's not true. You are a caregiver, even if you, and another thing, not only the long distance caregiver, if your loved one is in assisted living, if your loved one is in a nursing home, you are still a caregiver. So don't think because you're still doing a lot of managing, and that's another conversation for another day. You're still providing a lot of care, even if your loved one is in some kind of community. And I don't have to tell you this if you're going through this situation or you're in this situation. So these are the different caregiver types. I've categorized them in 3, but I did want to add that little caveat about long distance caregivers and those who are caring for someone who's in some kind of community or long-term care setting, such as a nursing home, etc. All right, I love this quote. I cannot use it enough. There are only 4 kinds of people in the world: those who have been caregivers, those who are currently caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need a caregiver. This pretty much captures us all. This means that we're not going to escape this. So this is not a them problem, a they problem. It's all of our responsibility to whatever role we play. is to take responsibility in supporting older adults and caregivers, just creating a space where this is honored, because we're all, you take a picture of this this quote if you're here now. This is something that you can really share with people. It's not going to miss you. You'll be in one of these four, or you know, it may revolve. Okay. I actually was sitting one day and I thought about just all of my work, my support groups, and everybody kind of wants to find a place. They want to find out, how do I do things? And I know something that's really big if you're in the business world, the leadership styles. We've all heard of it. You know, what's your leadership style? If you've ever been in an interview, people are asking you about your leadership style and how you operate. Well, I thought about this and I found that a lot of my caregivers, there's crossover. So the leadership styles were initially started by psychologist Kurt Lewin. So he had 3 initially. This has evolved over the years with many different theory patterns and leadership styles. But I wanted to say, hey, let's cross out the leadership style, because this also has some truths with the different types of caregivers that we have here. So we have, I've politely scratched out leadership, but giving all credit to psychologist Kurt Lewin for coming up with these, and then others who have come along the way to add more research and different findings on the different leaders we have. We have our autocratic caregiver, our laissez-faire caregiver, our democratic caregiver, our bureaucratic caregiver, our servant caregiver, and situational caregiver. Now, I know that these are not all of the leadership styles, but we're calling them caregiver styles today. So maybe type in the chat what caregiver style is missed up here. Which one did I miss out on? But we're going to go through each of these. I'll give examples, but I want you to be thinking about, as we kind of go through, is which one are you? Which one are you? And maybe which one is someone in your support network. What I did find is I've done a similar presentation to this before, and what I had is some caregivers found some relief. They may have still been frustrated, but they were able to say, well, that's why my brother responds like this when I bring these type of issues. That is totally my brother's style or my sister's style. Even though it doesn't eliminate that frustration, it may help you put things in context a little bit, and even look at yourself a little bit more and think, okay, well, this is how I operate in these situations, or this is me all the way. All right, our autocratic caregiver, and I was very intentional about these photos I selected. So for our autocratic caregiver, I have authority as the photo. This caregiver needs significant control, rarely considers any thoughts that anyone else may have. It's their way or kind of no way. And so when we think about an autocratic caregiver, there may be someone who's saying, oh, that's me, or it may have a negative connotation, but it may serve its purpose depending on what the caregiving situation is. But one thing's a reality, that there are caregivers like this. So they just need absolute control over everything. All right, then we have our laissez-faire caregiver. And it's just someone who's really hands off, may seem just nonchalant about whatever is going on. I remember the first time I had a similar presentation, I had a caregiver say, look, it explains it, that's my brother. Like every time I try to say something, he's just like, whatever, doesn't care. And I mean, I think we can break that down really into so many layers, honestly, and I'll go off on a tangent for a bit, because sometimes people are laissez-faire just because they're simply overwhelmed. They're like, look, if my sister's doing everything, let her go ahead and do everything, because I just can't even handle this. I'm overwhelmed and I don't like seeing mom this way. I don't like seeing dad this way, do whatever. So you have your laissez-faire caregiver. All right, democratic caregiver. Let's take a vote. That's what I think about when I think of this caregiver. Just trying to be very inclusive and make sure that they're getting input from every family member on that decision. And maybe you're trying to decide, should mom or dad or should my spouse age in place in their home, stay in their home, or is it time to move them to a care facility? Or it may be, what are we going to do about this end of life decision? Like, it seems that mom or dad or my spouse or whoever the relative may need some end of life services. What do we want to do? Instead of that autocratic caregiver saying, hey, this is it, this is what we're doing, they may not even get the autocratic caregiver may not even get the input of the person if they have the capacity to make those decisions. But the democratic caregiver really tries to be very inclusive and just make sure everyone's voice is heard. Then you have the bureaucratic caregiver, by the book. There are tons of resources, especially now, on caregiving and how to do it and what are the best practices. And it's just, you can get overwhelmed. The bureaucratic caregiver honestly probably knows about all of these resources. They've probably read all of these books, and this is how we deal with this situation, and this is how we're supposed to do this. There's really not any room for any gray in between. It's kind of this way or that way, and this is what I read, this is what I researched, and this is what we need to do. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but I do know, just working alongside caregivers, that a lot of times you can deviate from what's the norm depending on your situation. And if you're totally committed to following the books you've read or the 5 tips for being the caregiver of the year, it may not work, but it may work in other situations where you need to follow things very strictly. Okay. Servant caregiver. This is, you're thinking about the servant leadership, prioritizes the needs of others, encourages collective decision making. And this person is all in it to serve. So not only to serve that loved one, but even to serve the family, to make sure everyone in the family, it feels supported, feels like their voice is heard, feels like, okay, look, I'm going to give my all because this is a service to me, to this person. So they really prioritize the needs of others to the extent that they kind of minimize their own needs. So it's very noteworthy, and you want to give accolades to this person for being so thoughtless, but it's also a trade-off for that person in trying to ensure that just everyone's taken care of. They also are very focused on highlighting the strengths of others, seeing that we all have something to contribute to this situation. All right, then you have the situational caregiver, and this is where it depends on whatever's going on. What's the situation? Tell me what's happening, and I'm going to tell you how I'm going to respond to this. I'm going to look at, I may be that bureaucratic caregiver, I may be that a servant caregiver or autocratic. What's happening, and based on what's happening, I'll tell you what I need to do. And that may be a lot of people just kind of figuring out, okay, what do I need to do? What's happening? Give me the facts, give me the story. This is what we need to do. And I guess hearing it for me is, this person can be a bit reactive sometimes, instead of maybe like the bureaucratic caregiver and reading and going by the book for everything. So we have gone through the different caregiver styles. And I hope at this point you're sitting there thinking of scenarios and situations and thinking, hey, that's my brother, that's me, that's my spouse, or, now I have a bit of understanding. And now when people ask me how I'm making decisions, I can say, well, you know what, this is how I'm making this decision. But keeping this all into perspective, I want you to remember that there's no right or wrong. The caregiving, if there was a way to, honestly, let's just back up from caregiving. If there was a way to just do life, if someone could hand me a handbook and say, hey, do this, do that, I would be more than happy. But that's just not how it works. And it's definitely not going to work that way with your caregiving journey, because it's going to have so many ups and downs, twists and turns with not only you, but also the person that you love or you've stepped up to care for. That really a lot of people may look in from the outside in and say you're doing right or wrong. You can definitely take feedback, but you'll create your own journey. No one knows this journey until they have to actually be in it. It's always easier to yell from the sidelines. Your style may change based on the decision or task at hand. So this, like that situational caregiver, I had a caregiver tell me that, hey, I may be that laissez-faire caregiver when it comes to deciding whether or not my mom gets ice cream for dinner. I may not fuss about it this time. Not a big deal, but I may be more bureaucratic when I'm getting information from the doctors that I need to follow step by step. I may be by the book. So see how it has some flexibility and some leniency. The styles may help you understand. We've talked about this all throughout the presentation. Really help you understand yourself a little bit better. Maybe put a label if you like to do that. And it might help you understand someone else in your support circle, the way they may be approaching it. And what you might be interested to see is it similar to their leadership style? Is it how they operate just on an ordinary, or does caregiving bring out something else in them, which it often does in a lot of people? No matter what caregiving leadership style you have, what I do want you to know is there is no right or wrong. There are pros or cons to each and every style. We talked about the servant leadership, and I know that just for me in many interviews, I've named that as my own leadership style. It has its drawbacks when you're trying to prioritize others' needs and get the input of everyone. While it's noble and great, it does have its pros and cons, and that's for every single leadership style we listed. Okay. Just to kind of circle back on this again, you will evolve and discover along the way. So give yourself some grace and some mercy, because for a lot of you, this is new and you're figuring it out, or even if it's not new, it may be a new person. So that starts a new journey. So just being mindful of that. All right. Well, what I want you to think about now, which I'm sure you've been thinking about, and you've probably found some scenarios that identify with your caregiving style, or you may be saying, this is my identity, this is how I operate with my loved one each and every time. So just think about, what is your caregiver identity? After today, you should know. All right, I love quotes, as you can see. I alone cannot change the world, but I can cast a stone across the waters to create many ripples. And if anyone has not told you thank you, or they appreciate you, or you're doing a lot, or you're doing enough, you are enough as a caregiver, I just want to let you know that you are casting that stone across the water and creating many ripples. Caregiving never ends with just the person that you are caregiving for. It touches many lives, and you may not see it while you're in it, but it's going to keep paying forward. And so congratulations in a sense to you for either accepting this role or stepping up because there was a need. And keep this quote in mind when you have those days where it just feels like literally the world is on your shoulder. I know that you're not only a caregiver, but you're probably a business person. You're probably a mom, a dad, a spouse, a brother, a sister, a friend. You have all of these titles and things weighing on you. Don't discount them, because they all matter and they all make a difference in how you interact with the world.
Thank you so much, Malika. Really good information. We have a few questions that have come in.
Okay.
The first question said, you mentioned the forced personal caregiver, how does one begin to take care of themselves as opposed to the family member that they're taking care of?
Mm, that is a good question. I think for the person who feels like this role is forced or no one else would step in, first you have to be able to deal with the feelings of possible resentment, because that's there. And what I found, one of the ways it's really helpful are support groups. If you can find a support group, and you have to find the right one, find one where you can be very open, where the facilitators allow you to say, look, I'm tired of caring for my mom, or maybe you had a bad day. Because what I found is, as a support group facilitator, is that a lot of times people don't allow you to be open with those feelings of, hey, I didn't want to do this. Because you may be sitting next to people who said, hey, I always knew I was going to be there for this person like they were there for me, and it's not your story. So support groups, maybe even therapy, having somebody, or if you don't go that far, have someone that you can be very honest with and say, hey, I didn't really want to do this, but I'm doing it and it's really taking a toll on me. And so I think that the first step is really acknowledging that you didn't want to do it. And that way you can move forward and be more intentional and mindful about finding positive things along the way, or bringing in people to support, like we talked about, those formal caregivers that may be able to do some things that you really probably emotionally can't do, or maybe you physically can't do, or maybe it's just because you just can't handle it right now. You're trying to find your way, yet be there for this person at the same time.
You mentioned these support groups,
Mhm.
Malika. Are we also talking about support groups either in person or online, or a combination?
Yes. So just in general, because I want you to get the support that you need, whether it be Agent and Amazing or another company, there are in-person support groups. As you know, in the last couple of years, it's dwindled because of the pandemic. But I know a few are starting to meet. For Agent and Amazing, we're actually starting up online support groups, and the whole goal of it is to connect people from all over who will be able to support one another. And often with caregivers, they're not only a caregiver, they are running businesses, they're caring for a family, et cetera, et cetera. So the virtual, even though it kind of happened, I think by mistake for all of us, it's been a blessing for caregivers who aren't able to come make it in person. They may not be able to make it during the day. And I know Agent and Amazing, we're specifically trying to have a few support groups late at night, because that may be when your loved one's asleep. So you can find both, just search intentionally. Right now, Agent and Amazing is offering or building registration for online support groups only.
Yeah. Somebody asked the question, I have a large family.
Mm.
Is it possible, if there are, as far as if multiple family members want to be involved in the caregiving aspect of it, if one or two of the family members have the same caregiver style, will that
Mm.
mix, or is that do you try and stay away from that? In other words, what if you have two autocratic caregivers? How would you recommend that play out within the personal caregiver?
Mm. It's definitely, first of all, I really want to commend this person, whoever wrote this question, for highlighting two people out of this big family. Because oftentimes I know when I worked in long-term care communities or continuing care retirement communities, we would have some families who would try to send the entire family to make decisions. As you can imagine, no one ever really agrees. I do like that this person also pointed out that, if they both have that autocratic style, they may need some balance. So it's worth a conversation. I'm not going to say that it cannot work. I think that both parties need to acknowledge that if they have that autocratic style, they may be dismissing maybe some input from family members who may have a different perspective on something. Like maybe it is that mom needs to eat vegetables, but she's at end of life, and maybe the ice cream's okay, for this point in the juncture. So I think that it's having a discussion, knowing that, hey, this is how we look at situations, but we may have someone else in the family member, such as Mary, who may have a different perspective, that she may not make the final decision, but can offer us some input. Maybe we're seeing it one-sided and we need to get a little bit more in the gray to make a more informed decision.
Yeah. Last question, Malika. Somebody says, I have a family member that has cognitive concerns. Is there a certain caregiver type that is best to work with somebody with cognitive issues?
Ooh, great question. Wonderful question. I cannot answer that yes or no. I think that even though, because I want to keep in mind, even when I'm teaching students and I'm letting them know about cognitive decline, just because a person has cognitive decline does not mean they can't make decisions. So really finding out where that person is, where can they make a decision? Because what I've seen is sometimes you may see a diagnosis of dementia and someone may run with that and completely like, okay, mom or dad or my spouse can't make any decision. They just can't. Do you see this diagnosis of dementia on this page? They can't do anything, but that's not the case. There may be some lucidity somewhere where if they can't make the major decisions, maybe they can pick out their clothes for the day. It may not look like the outfit you would want them to have. So really what I'm saying and what we say in social work is finding someone's strengths. So it's going to vary. You'll probably be more of that situational caregiver. It may be some battles that you don't want to fight. For example, with the clothing, that may not be something that you want to do, but it may be we're driving, that's just a non-negotiable. Like you can't drive to the appointment or you can't drive to the grocery store. So really finding ways to adapt and navigate where you're honoring yourself and the safety that you have and responsibility that you have for this person, but also you're leaving room. It's not easy. You're leaving room, but you're trying to honor that person's dignity and autonomy that they have left, because just as this is a loss for you, it's a loss for that person in knowing that they're not able to function and to do like they used to do. All right, so we do have a few minutes left. You can contact me. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. You can contact Aging and Amazing at contactus@agingamazing.org. I'm also on LinkedIn. So it's Malika Moore, and it's www.linkedin.com/n/Miss MSMALIKA That's for LinkedIn. We're also on Facebook at Aging, AGING, AMAZING, LLC, and on YouTube, Aging and Amazing LLC. So let's talk, like what's your caregiver identity?
Well, thank you so much, Malika. I know you've given out all of your contact information, so thank you for sharing that. As far as Knowledgeable Aging, you can go to our website, knowledgeableaging.com. You can see all of our upcoming and archived webinars. If you go to YouTube, type in Knowledgeable Aging, we encourage you to subscribe. We do update a couple times per month. If podcasts are your thing, you can find us on Apple, Tunes, Spotify, etc. Till next time, I'm your host, Jason Kotar. This is Knowledgeable Aging.